Minimize that. All right, so now the reason you guys are all here, let's get to your headliner tonight. This guy, I pretty much think he is basically the most interesting man in the world, like the Dos Equis guy. Anytime I call him, he's either like in Zimbabwe judging a beauty contest, or he's like rescuing turtles off the coast of Chile. But Howard Donner, in a former life, was a medical doctor. I believe he still is technically, but he's a local CFI. He flies around a lot here and in the kind of Auburn area. Previously, he was a river and mountain guide. He's been a what is it, the medical consultant for NASA, among other things. Please help me welcome Mr. Howard Donner.
Thank you, David. Perfect. Well, thanks for coming and driving through the rain. And this is going to be a potpourri of a million different things. So if you get bored for a minute, it's going to change. And I'm going to try to go quickly and cover a lot of ground. So here we go. But I have a few mental illnesses. And one of my major mental illnesses is making sure the heading bug is always set for wherever you're going and not going nowhere. And my other mental illness is I always have to show video before I give a talk. So here's your video. All righty. So we're going to be talking about modern rescue stuff, communications, and we'll start with this one. You all probably know Jeff Manasco, but he asked me to talk about this, and I'm not going to. He wanted to know, when you go to one of these signs, how do they know? And we'll talk about that later. Thank you. Oh, that's cool. Game of Thrones? Yeah. Which episode? 6. No, take it away. Thank you. This is where we are. So we'll start with this really simple communications. I teach some post-crash survival, taught survival most of my life, despite the fact that my last name is Donner. I know that just for those people. But these are super important. They're in every survival book. John, you're a consummate pilot. Do you want to, just for the group, just kind of rattle off the first, say, 10 ground-to-air signals? So these are in every survival manual I've ever seen. I have never met a pilot who knows any of these. Any CAP people in here? Probably. Okay, can you rattle off the first 12? No. So I don't know why they put these in survival books. Nobody knows them. I would remember that an arrow pretty much means going in this direction if you don't stay at the scene of your wreck. If you wreck your plane and decide to leave. Oh, the golden rule is always stay with your plane. I do not believe in golden rules. There are times where you have to break them. Put an arrow. And an X is generally thought to mean that you've got issues. So an X is, wait, I guess it says health. Okay, we're going to talk about just signal flares. And one of the things that I like is back in the olden days, up until a few years ago, even aviators would often bring pyrotechnic style flares along with them. And I just feel like they're still used a lot in the marine world, and I do a lot of stuff in the ocean as well. But in the modern era, there's a new device out, which is this stuff. which are these rescue laser lights that can be used for signaling distress. And the advantages are, and we'll talk about signal mirrors in a few minutes, but one of the advantages are, David asked me if you can use signal mirrors at night, and you can't. So these tend to work really well. I've got one back there. It is the most anticlimactic thing I ever do. People will go, "Oh, are you going to demonstrate those?" And I'll go, "Sure." And it looks like a laser beam, except for it's attenuated and it creates this sort of swath of laser light. So the idea is that it attenuates the intensity of the light so that it won't blind your SAR pilots. And it just provides a pop of laser light, either red or green. The green goes up to 11, so it's a little stronger. And it's more expensive as well. But they really work well. And people ask for how far. It depends on which one you have. And there is, but basically, even the smaller red one at night up to 16 miles, which is great. And during the day, many miles. So I've got one in the back. So afterwards, if people are interested, you can play with it. But I promise it's kind of like a laser light. Signal mirrors might seem like sort of a thing you learn in scouts, but who cares? Signal mirrors really work. John, do you mind? I don't mean to pick on you, but do you mind just describing from Utah when we were there what that looks like?
That was actually a pretty bright flash. Are you talking about in terms of using it or seeing it?
Seeing it.
Yeah, it was probably 200 years away.
At least. I think Peter was most of the way down the runway.
Most of the way down the road. Yeah. It was a pretty bright flash as it swept past it. So you kind of see very good.
Just be sure you learn how to use them. They seem very simple, but you don't just take the mirror and point it at the airplane. So, we have courses where we teach this kind of stuff, and if nothing else, you can watch YouTubes, but they're very. I just found out that some of this stuff on the internet isn't necessarily true. But I was watching this one. This guy's going, "You don't need one of those fancy signal mirrors. All you need to do is just take any mirror. You see the plane there? Just put your hand up like this and get the sunlight on your fingers. You get the plane between your fingers." And he has the mirror down here. So he clearly didn't understand parallax. If you're gonna do that, I don't do this, even though every survival book does that. I just go like this and take the mirror and bring it up to your eye. And then you can get away with that. But we don't have time to teach techniques because we got a million things to do. But get a signal mirror, learn how to use it, and you will be happy you have it. I've talked to people. Here's a picture of a signal mirror from many miles away. This is 6 miles away. I don't know if you can see that, but it's quite bright. Nothing wrong with just bringing a good old-fashioned headlamp. I think most of us carry headlamps these days for nighttime. A headlamp is a great signal, and in your flight bag and survival kit, you should definitely have a headlamp. I've had people on courses, when we teach them how to use a signal mirror, they go, "Well, could you use this at night by shining your headlamp into it?" And I go, "Sure, but you could just..." This is something I carry in my flight bag, just a little tiny emergency headlamp that doesn't weigh anything. I carry that Petzl, looks sort of like a suppository. The one underneath it is the this new one that I really like called a Night Core that is very light, and unlike the Petzl, and I use a Petzl because that's what I've always used, but the Night Core is really bright. I think it's 400 lumens, which is much brighter than the Petzl. So anyway, people have said, yeah, the CAP people will appreciate this. Those stupid rescuers, we were there waving and they just kept flying by. I mean, this is what you see, but this is what it looks like to people in the air looking down on the ground. It's really hard to spot, folks. So just know that. And in our survival classes, we teach a lot of ways to make yourself more visible. And there are a lot of techniques for doing that. For people that do stuff on the ocean, historically, people have used fluorescent sea dye markers, and that's what the military often uses. Just in the last few years, they've come out with these sea rescue streamers. And these things are cool. Basically, they come in a little tube. You unroll it on the water. It's about the size of a cell phone when you start. And if the search is continuing at night over the ocean, these things light up. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but this is what it looks like after it's deployed. And that's from an aircraft. So they work. Not going to spend much time talking about this. This is just a way to turn your cell phone into a family radio, even in an area with no cell coverage. I think most of us know that you can put maps on your smartphones. The company that I've been using quite a bit of late is Caltopo. They have amazing features in the latest update, and the owner of Caltopo lives in Truckee. Some of you may know him. And in the latest iteration of Caltopo, they now show where observed avalanches have occurred in the last either storm cycle or the last week or the last month or the entire season. So you can actually see where slides have occurred, as well as all sorts of things like this, terrain contours, et cetera, et cetera. So good thing to have on your smartphone. That's what the terrain contour feature looks like. So if you're interested in avalanche, anything that's orangey is 30 degrees or more, and on and on. I'm going to talk a little bit about how GPS works. And I think people's response typically is, I know how it works. I just get my BMW and I push the button. But we're going to talk about really what's going on with GPS and some of the pitfalls. So first of all, there are a whole bunch of different systems. It's not just the US. The US-based system is one of many. The ones that are most prominent right now are the Chinese system and the European system. But India is doing their own, as Japan's doing their own. This is what the first GPS looked like. And I just want you to appreciate how amazing it is now that we have GPS chips on our smartphones and watches. This was circa about 1988 or so, called the Man Pack. Interesting. And this is what that thing looked like. So that's what GPSs looked like then. And obviously things have changed quite a bit. We're not going to bog down on this, but typically 24 operational satellites with the US system, 5 satellites above the horizon at any time. We'll talk about how that is important for rescue in a few moments. They all carry atomic clocks. Your GPS obviously doesn't have an atomic clock in it, just has a standard crystal. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. The orbits are weird. They're not geosynchronous orbits, but they're not low Earth orbit. They're sort of a hybrid, higher than typical low Earth orbiting satellites. And they orbit the Earth every 12 hours, and they're spares, and they come in and they come out. Interesting, geostationary orbit. People think, oh, geostationary satellites are a little higher, I guess, than low Earth orbit. Low Earth orbit, like the space station, you're talking 200 to 300 miles for low Earth orbit. Geostationary satellites are at about 23,000 miles away from Earth. So very different. If you're interested, the control system for the US-based system is in Colorado Springs. And this is the part that I find really fun. And that's if you're into navigation, and for the pilots in the room, which are many of you, speed times time equals distance. Use this on the ocean. It's been used by mariners for probably thousands of years. And it's really important because we use the same equation for determining our position with GPS. Now, I could easily bog down here, but has anybody in this room read a book called Longitude? There we go. One person. It's a great book. And I thought the book was primarily about navigation, and it sort of is. But the book is largely concerns itself with the search for an accurate timepiece. And latitude's pretty easy. If you can see Polaris, the North Star, you can pretty much determine your latitude, but longitude is hard. So this slide, which I can't imagine you can see from the back, but if we were using candle clocks and water clocks in our GPSs, you could pinpoint your position within about 170 million miles. So you can see trends would be somewhere over there. With a mechanical clock, 34 million miles. With a marine chronometer, 186,000 miles. So you could set it in your GPS and end up within 186,000 miles of where you wanted to be. But quartz crystal, 250 miles, but it takes an atomic clock to get the kind of 30-foot accuracy that we're getting right now. And interestingly, if you're into sort of nerdy stuff, Albert Einstein, as you know, postulated both with special and with general relativity, this whole concept of time dilation. And the important thing is that satellites are orbiting and going at, they're experiencing a different gravitational pull, and they're moving much faster than we are as they're orbiting. So you have to factor in the corrections postulated by Einstein, and it turns out that it works perfectly. And without using relativity and general relativity and special relativity in these calculations, GPS wouldn't work. So how does GPS work? Well, the way you can imagine it is picture a satellite and using that equation that we talked about, the speed of light is a constant. So if you know how much time it took, you can figure out what the distance is. So let's look at that, just a crude animation. So if you had one sphere, you could figure that you were some.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No. Okay, should I respond? Everything good? Imagine that if you had one satellite, you could pinpoint your location somewhere to the surface of the sphere. You have to imagine intersecting spheres now. So with two satellites, you're somewhere on this ring. That's the intersection of these two spheres. With three satellites, you can actually pinpoint your location to two spots. But if you want to figure out where you are, you can do what's called two-dimensional navigation with three satellites. It assumes you're on the surface of the Earth. So you can get a lat long without an altitude. But to actually get altitude information, you need four satellites, and then you can actually determine a specific point with altitude. And for the pilots in here, many of you, that's what you're doing when you're using your GPS. You have a minimum of four satellites, which is able to not just give you 2 points, one on Earth, using the Earth as a fourth sphere, but actually a fourth satellite, which will pinpoint your position and give you fairly accurate altitude. We'll talk about WAS in a few minutes. So before we move on, if you have a GPS in your plane, it doesn't happen with planes very often because usually your plane starts up, your aircraft is where you landed it, typically, unless you put it in a trailer and bring it across country. But with a handheld GPS that doesn't use cell, and we'll talk about assisted GPS and what goes on with your smartphones in a minute, but typical Garmin GPS that's not talking anything but the satellites, it takes a while to initialize if you change locations. And people are sitting there going, what's it doing? You know, it's taking 2 minutes to initialize. Well, what it's doing is it is doing thousands of calculations because it doesn't know what time it is. And people go, no, it knows what time it is. There's a crystal clock in your GPS. There's in your cell phone, for example. But it really doesn't know what time it is because it doesn't know how far away the satellites are. So how can it know what time it is? It can talk to the atomic clocks on the GPS satellites, but it doesn't know how far that signal traveled. So it really doesn't know what time it is. So it's using the intersection of all these spheres and making all of these calculations to determine what the intersection and the solution to this problem. So when your GPS is initializing, that's what it's doing. It's calculating how can it figure out how all of these spheres intersect to give you a precise location. Once it knows where it is, then it knows what time it is because it knows how far it is from the atomic clocks in the GPS satellites. I said that it was important to know this for rescue and such. So we said that there are up to 12 satellites at any one time in one hemisphere. So imagine you're up in your aircraft or you're on the ocean where the horizon's not being obstructed. So here's a little animation. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll read it for the people in the back. This is how many satellites are visible above the horizon. 8, 10, 9, 8, 6, 9, 11, 12. Sometimes we'll go down to 5. It hasn't yet, but it does. So you might say, well, that's plenty. We talked about 4 satellites for 3D. But imagine that you're terrestrial, and imagine you're in a canyon, or there's vegetation, or a cliff band, or whatever, a mountain, a building. You can see that during certain periods where there may only be 5 or 6 satellites, you may not be able to get a good fix. I'm not going to bog down on this so-called delusion of precision. I'll just say this, that there's good geometry and bad geometry, and oversimplifying, but good geometry would be, in a perfect world, if you only had 4 satellites, would be a GPS satellite right on the horizon, and then trisecting the horizon, a second one, and a third one, and one overhead. That would be perfect geometry for 4 satellites. The worst geometry is when you have 4 satellites clumped together anywhere in the sky. So a little game I play, because I'm weird, is I will look at an almanac, see where the satellites are, and predict the accuracy. And usually I can sort of predict the accuracy just by the geometry. Okay, this is something that CAP people deal with. Most of us don't. And that's just that different maps that different people are using have different datums. And that can throw off the position. If you're working from a map with one datum, but you have a different datum in your aircraft, et cetera, et cetera. Is this a big deal? No. That's why I'm not going to talk about it for very long. Just to mention that you should be aware, if you're a search pilot, what datum you're using in your GPS and what datum the people reporting their lat long to are using. But it's only going to throw you off by a few hundred feet. So it's not the end of the world. Most pilots in here know a little bit about WAAS. WAAS is Wide Area Augmentation System. It's essentially a way to increase the accuracy of GPS. What's happening with WAAS is you have 3 geosynchronous satellites in the US that are just sitting in geosynchronous orbit, meaning they don't move relative to the horizon. You have a series of ground-based stations that are reporting to the satellite what the error is on that at that particular moment in time. And the error might be, here is the ground-based station, and for some reason, its own internal GPS is telling it that it's here. So it realizes there's a 10-foot error to the south. It corrects, it sends the correction data for that area back to the WAAS satellite, and the WAAS satellite literally transmits that correction data to your aircraft, to the GPS in your aircraft. And so your aircraft is continuously updating in real time that correction error. And that's how WAAS enables pilots to fly these precision approaches. And, again, there are a lot of pilots in here, so I won't bog down with pilot stuff that you already know. Don't know this, that there are different kinds of approaches, and some approaches that are GPS based, so-called RNAV based approaches that just use satellites, GPS. Some are WAAS and some aren't. And the WAAS ones are more better because they allow you to fly precision approaches just using GPS. So you get vertical guidance as well. So this is old-fashioned Loran. You might wonder why in 2025 you're coming to a talk and I'm talking about Loran. That's weird. Loran went out, 20 years ago. The thing is, it's coming back most likely. And this was called Loran C. Your grandfathers or your fathers, or maybe your Loran was Loran C. What's coming back is eLoran. And the reason for eLoran is there's some worry that GPS, as more and more aircraft, including obviously military and commercial airliners, are relying on satellite-based navigation. What happens when during war, some other country starts shooting down our GPS satellites? What happens if there's just a major malfunction? What happens if there's satellite jamming? And on and on and on. So in the next decade or so, it appears that we may be developing a very advanced ground-based navigation system called ELRAN. And there are already some test facilities looking at it. So that's what ELRAN is going to look like. We're going to have big ground-based ELRAN transmitters. This is a picture of an ELRAN setup that they have in Great Britain right now that is a test. Those red lights down there are ELRAN test stations. So this is probably the future. Okay, what about smartphones? So how is it that you can pull your smartphone out right now and it will tell you where you are? Or if you're in an airport. I always think about that when I'm in an airport. It sees me walking along the terminal. How does it know? So it uses something called assisted GPS. I think most of you probably know this or made this assumption that it's using so-called trilateration, which is basically triangulation using cell towers. So your smartphone, whether it's an Android or an Apple, definitely has a GPS chip in it. But in addition, it's triangulating the location of the various cell towers that you have access to. So that's how it does it. 911, something that's really changing in the country right now. In California, to my knowledge, just about every county that I'm aware of has, at this point, 2025, in California, has next generation 911. It means you can text 911 rather than call in 911. And there's some advantages there. One is maybe you can't talk. You've had a stroke or you're injured and can't speak. You could type in your 911 call. And number two, the text, the data packets required to get out a text message are much less than voice. And so there's a possibility you could get a 911 text out even though you're unable to connect for a voice call. A lot of I'm not going to go into this, but most of the next generation 911 systems are using this rapid SOS based system, which is a proprietary company that helps to essentially provide all of the data for next generation 911. So if you're interested, go to Rapid SOS. Okay, this was yesterday, sadly. Paige and Sheridan over in the back know the pilot of this plane. Sadly, a jet plane taxied through this airplane. And that's what it'll look like afterwards. But I put this in to remind me that in a wreck, there's a couple things. Number one is reciprocal 911 is that if you have a Verizon phone and you dial 911, and it turns out that somebody says to you, yeah, Verizon doesn't work here. We have AT&T, and that works really well, but sadly, Verizon doesn't. So are you out of luck when you text or dial 911? And it turns out that all of these companies have a reciprocity. And that is that if you dial 911, it will go to any tower, T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, Mint, any carrier that's still available. So that's good news. And the other thing is that modern cell phones now, smartphones like Apple now have crash detection, which is a good and bad thing. It's a good thing in that if you crash or you get in a car wreck, it will notify 911 that you have received a very high G load, probably in a crash. The downside is, if you've ever flown with Raj, most of her landings. So they do get a lot of sort of false alarms. something that you should be aware of if you're a pilot or anybody, I guess, is, you know, in my other life, I teach a lot of rescue classes and rescue medicine courses. And one of the things that we teach our students, and these are typically paramedics, doctors, nurses, military medics, is if they're in the wilderness and they have to make the call, what information needs to go out. And it's the same in your aircraft. You need to let somebody know in your Mayday call where you are. And the easiest thing to do is just say, I'm 12 miles north of Stampede. That's great. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, you don't know the local topography. So how do you report your position? So a couple things. This is a G1000. And if you just, see, David, this is an interesting one. So this animation doesn't point to where I want it. So you go to this range button and just push it. You'll get a lat and long up there. And it'll show you what your lat long is instantaneously. So that's one trick. And there are many tricks. If you use ForeFlight, you can just, if you look down at the bottom right, again, you might not be able to see this, but you can set up via the menu what data fields you want for ForeFlight. And one of them is your current coordinates. And down there, you can see that. Another thing is you could just touch your position in ForeFlight and see if this works. And you'll get your location up there with a lat long. And the point I'm making isn't necessarily to learn any one of these techniques, but just to know how you would do it in your airplane if you very quickly needed to transmit your lat long. Yes.
Telling your lat long.
2 decimals is probably good.
2 decimals.
Yeah.
So 34.25.
Exactly. Because beyond that, your plane's going to travel farther than that by the time you smack into it. If you've got a smartphone, this is just off my phone today. Getting ready for this talk. I was at my house up in Tahoe Donner, and if you go to your compass page, Android users, something like this, I'm sure. But on the compass page, you can see your lat long. It's like smartphone, go to the compass page, and there's your lat long. Yeah.
That makes sense. That's what we're able to figure out whether that decimals.
Good point. So most rescuers like to use just decimal lat long. There are, John's point is really good. There are 3 different conventions for reporting lat long, and it's a total mess. So if you had minutes and seconds, I would just say 39 degrees, 20 minutes north, and leave it at that. But hopefully you'll have thought about this ahead of time.
We'll check both. Good. Serious. All 3 and be like, oh, here you go. Here. Where it'll be like, are you sure you're in the
If you've got just Google loaded on your phone, I'm sure Apple does this too. Just touch it. Just create a drop pin. And with the drop pin, usually when you drop pins, it's because you're trying to, tell your friends where you're going to meet them for sushi. I know for you guys. We want to find out where that place is, by the way. And but just know when you drop a pin in Google Maps, it gives you a lat long. I highlighted that. So that's another way to quickly get it.
It's your home address right there. Follow-up questions, you know where to find it.
There are a bunch of apps, I'm not going to bog down on this, that give you lots of stuff like this, if you're geeky. Okay, what about Find My Friends? There have been rescues that have basically just used Find My Friends. The problem with Find My Friends is that one of 2 things has to happen. A, you have to have that person in your friend list to find them. Obviously, there needs to be cell coverage or it's not going to work, but it has been used in rescues. And the rescue, sheriff search and rescue, or if you were working with Tahoe Nordic, they could get a warrant. Usually takes some time to use Find My Friends, but Apple is very proprietary about that. So generally, I wouldn't count on Find My Friends unless you already have it set up with your friends or colleagues, your spouse, or whatever. Same thing for watches. Now, there's a couple things going on. There are a bunch of these apps now. I would say, I don't know how many. I would say easily 10. The one that looks really interesting to me is called Air Flare. It's a wilderness rescue app. It does rely on cell coverage. So you have to be in wilderness, such as the Tahoe area, where there is cell coverage. Since most of you are probably more interested in the satellite side of this, I'm not going to bog down on this, but just know that I think this is $6 a year. It has a G activation. It has, and your friends and family can follow you, and it's $6 a year. There's no other subscription other than the $6. The big downside is it is definitely cell tower based. So for the pilots in here and such, it wouldn't work. It's not going to help you flying over the middle of Nevada. One thing I like to talk about in my survival classes is if you have a phone, we're going to jump around a little bit with smartphones, because at the end, we're going to talk, of course, about Apple and what they're doing. But just know that the biggest problem with cell phones is the battery. And I have a pretty new phone. I think it's a 50, and the battery lasts one day and it's done. So you need to throw some kind of a power bank in your flight bag or survival kit. So if you're relying on your phone, you're going to have juice when you need it. One thing that I teach, yes. And I have solar roofs. Good point. Yep. Something I teach is, I think most pilots know that if things go badly, you want to fly the plane and you don't want to be fiddling around with your cell phone. But if I was going down, I would ask a passenger while I'm trying to fly the plane. I would ask a passenger to dial 911. And that's typically not a protocol that you hear about, but it just makes sense to me that they might get a ping off the 911 call, or you might even be able to connect. But even if you don't connect, just have your passengers dial 911 on the way down. There's a new thing. This thing is so cool. It's called LifeSeeker. It's only been out for less than a year. And what it is it's this device, and they are really cryptic about their technology. But what it does is you can swing it underneath a helicopter or an aircraft, and it lights up cell phones in areas where there are no cell towers. So if the victim on a search has a cell phone, the cell phone has to be on, so it won't work if the cell phone has died. But during the first 24 hours where hopefully the cell phone's on, in the middle of nowhere, you've got a LifeSeeker. It works like a miniature cell phone tower and will light up the victim's cell phone. And just by moving around with the search aircraft, it will triangulate their position. Are you guys using this, Sarah, at all, or do you know about this?
This is Sarah Crenman, president of Tahoe Nordic Search and Rescue.
So here's a LifeSeeker hanging from a drum, doing a search with that. All right, not going to talk much about ADS-B because most of us are pilots. We know what it is. Just know that for the non-pilots in here, that there is now an amazing system of a satellite network that allows pilots and ground-based air traffic controllers and such to visualize airplanes without using radar and just using GPS returns to ground-based stations, to other aircraft, and to satellites. So it has really changed the name of the game. This is just an iPad looking at ADS-B traffic, which most of the pilots in this room probably use some form of this. They also have all sorts of stuff on their panel. But because most of you are aware of ADS-B in an aviation room like this, I thought I'd talk about some other technology. For marine use, there's something called AIS, which is Automatic Identification System. And in the marine world, back in the olden days, all you really had was radar. But you couldn't see a ship coming around a rocky, outcropping in the ocean. It was limited to just a radar blip that was often contaminated with all sorts of ground clutter or sea clutter. And so it was just hard to pick out other vessels. Now we have AIS. So it's just like ADS-B out on the water. And not only do you see the other vessel, but you get a lot of information about it. As you can see in this case, obviously its location, but the name of the ship, what kind of ship it is, how fast it's going, where it's going. So this has really changed maritime navigation, because now, just like the pilots in here that use ADS-B, people are using AIS out on the ocean. That's what an AIS receiver looks like, even on a smaller boat. And just like you can get foreflight and see other planes with a Stratus, you can get apps that show you other traffic. And just like foreflight, when it's not hooked up to a Stratus, you can get internet traffic. You can do the same thing with AIS. I teach a lot with this, a lot of survival classes with this woman named Cheryl. She's very old school, and she's always bothered by the fact that we head off with our electronic devices. She teaches all sorts of navigation classes and such, and she would be the first to remind us all that you should probably have a map and compass. They used to make something, they were called denials that people used. So consider it. There you go. You got it all on your watch now. Okay, I know a lot of people came tonight to hear about this stuff, which are basically satellite-based rescue systems. And the first was this huge system that was set up by the Russia and the United States in cooperation. We cooperate with rescue and with space, believe it or not. And they created, see, David, there's an example of.
It converted from a menu. I get it.
So David, if you don't mind, in return for this aberration, can you just pronounce the name of the city? Russian. So anyway, a whole group of distress radio beacons. And so the first would be an ELT. Most pilots in here know a lot about this, so I'm not going to bog down on this. Back in the olden days, and still for some, we're flying 121.5 ELTs. In the modern era, hopefully you're flying a 406 megahertz ELT. There are a lot of differences. If I get into this discussion, it'll take a while, but just know this, and most of you know this. If you're flying an old-fashioned 121.5, no satellites are going to be looking for you. You're going to be dependent on just that transmitted distress signal being picked up by somebody that's monitoring guard. And I bet you CAP monitors guard, military pilots monitor guard, airliners monitor guard, and all of us should be monitoring guard, but we often don't. So, and I'm included in that group of people that don't. I do on long trips when I'm going cross country, but you know, if I'm flying with a student over to Nervino, I'm not monitoring guard. So think about it. I wanted to talk a little bit about. I'm curious. Do you mind raising your hands? How many of you are pilots? Wow. Okay, cool. So most of you know this. When I'm talking to groups of doctors and nurses and such, I always tell them about this, just that they need to know if they're flying a rescue mission or adventure travel, or they're doing relief medicine, they need to know that pretty much any plane they're going to be in is going to have an ELT in the back. I teach them where it's typically located, how to get to it, and let them know that typically there's going to be something in the back of the plane in the tail section that's orange or yellow or red, and it's going to have switches with 3 positions, basically, an on position, an off position, and typically an arm position. If you're in a little dink plane, you know, I'm teaching a little bit in the RV-12 here, and the RV-12 just has a completely independent ELT with an antenna sticking out of it. So if I was going to leave the wreck, I'd just take it with me, turn it on. Don't turn it on and off, just take it with you. And now you've got your own personal PLB 406. If you're, the problem is if you're in a bigger plane where it's hooked up to an antenna, it's probably not going to work. EPIRBs are what are used for marine-based rescue, distress beacons. And an EPIRB is basically the same as your 406 ELT. It's just certified for the ocean. So it has to fulfill certain criteria regarding the antenna has to float up. It has to be saltwater impervious. The battery life has to last so long. So it's a certification thing. But the brains of an EPIRB, which if you're ever on a ferry boat or a commercial fishing vessel or any large commercial boat, it will have an EPIRB. It's basically the boat's ELT. And they make little portable ones too. I do a lot of sailing, and the boats I sail typically will have a portable EPIRB, just a little Garmin EPIRB somewhere. So for many of us, we're interested in, what else is there for hiking, not necessarily for our airplanes, but what could we carry along? And that is a PLB. And PLB stands for Personal Locator Beacon. They keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is the Ocean Rescue Me. David, you said you have this one? Good. How big is it? Can you show people? Pretty cool.
It's in your hand.
So this is what it looks like. The question is, they did. I forget who bought them. Maybe ACR bought them. I'm not sure. But is it on there? It's called the PLB-1 now. It used to be called the Ocean Rescue. Same form factor, but yes, it was purchased by a larger company. The cool thing about these is they deploy this long antenna. There are status lights that flash that basically act as a test. It's not a transmitted test. With 406, you really can't test it the way we used to test 121.5, but it does a self-test showing that the GPS is functional and that the batteries are optimized. So you're doing a test and watching the status via a series of lights. The batteries, and we'll talk about Garmin inReaches and all that stuff in a minute, but the battery life is 7 years. 7 years. So people sometimes go, why would I get one of these? Because an inReach is so much better. Well, in many ways, an inReach is better, but there's a lot to be said for PLBs, so that David's mother was very smart when she got him this. The early PLBs did not have GPS. So how could they find you? And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, there's no two-way confirmation. So once you send your distress signal, you have no way of knowing that anyone's received it. And but the broadcasts continue for a minimum of 48 hours. Okay, moving on. This is the little self-test buttons and lights that we talked about. The antenna deploys, which is better in some ways than a Garmin inReach because it's got this huge antenna. This is how the whole SAR satellite system works. You indicate that you have distress, or your ELT, in the case of 406, goes off, and it goes up to these COSPAS SARSAT satellites. These are governmental satellites. They're not proprietary. And it then goes to a so-called LUT, the local user terminal, and then is transferred to mission control and finally rescue coordination. Rescue coordination center gets the call or gets the distress signal. They figure out where the person is. And so if you're in the county, they'd probably call the sheriff. Sheriff would call Sarah and her group, et cetera, et cetera. If you're out off the coast, the rescue coordination would call the Coast Guard. If you're off trekking in Zimbabwe, they might call the embassy. So it just depends, but that's what the rescue coordination center does. All right. So COSPAS SARSAT utilizes a whole bunch of satellites. I don't want to bog down on this either, but that includes geostationary satellites, which have this giant footprint, but don't work very well above about 20 or 30 degrees north and south latitude. They have low Earth orbiting satellites, like a bunch of bugs orbiting the Earth. And even if you don't have GPS capability on the really old PLBs that didn't have internal GPS chips, because this was developed before GPS, believe it or not. It can use Doppler location just with all these satellites flying around. It takes a few hours, but a few hours is better than never. And they can locate your position just using Doppler. The latest, greatest thing, just in the last, I'd say 5 years, is MEOSAR, which is instead of low Earth, this is middle Earth orbiting satellites. They have a relatively higher orbit, and the acquisition is really fast. And the cool thing about MEOSAR is if you activate a PLB since MEOSAR, the activation is almost instantaneous. You can still use old equipment, and MEOSAR still works with it, so you don't have to worry about compatibility. If you have an ELT, EPIRB, or PLB, you have to register. So you go to the internet. I mean, they have forms you can mail in, but most people go to the internet. And the cool thing about it is, you can change this in real time. So you can, if you're going out on some mission, you can say, yeah, I've got this survival kit, or you can talk about your medical condition, or you can say whatever you need to say that you think will assist rescuers. This is done before you leave. But the coolest thing in my mind is that it gives you place for 8 telephone numbers, which could be your colleagues at work or your spouse or your friends, and they'll call you. So let's say it's Jim and he shows up missing, and he puts my name on this, and they call me and they go, "What's going on with Jim?" I'll go, "I don't know." No, hopefully I wouldn't have. So anyway, be sure you fill this out. One thing I teach in my survival and medical courses too is that it's funny. I work a lot with finer points, Jason Miller, and we run airplane camps all over the place. And Jason and I argue a lot. He doesn't like it when I say this, but we have different opinions about many things. And I think you should always file a flight plan, but I don't think your flight plan has to be with the FAA. So if I was going flying and John and I were hanging out, I might say, hey, John, I'm gonna fly over to, whatever. I'm gonna be flying over to Markleeville today. I'm gonna be back before sunset. I'm gonna pretty much be going direct from here, and I'll text you when I get back. What Jason doesn't like about it is he thinks there's just a lot of room for error, and John just being absent-minded. Not that John's absent-minded, but that he might be. And that's why Jason doesn't like it. I like it because I feel like rather than always filing a flight plan, at least somebody always knows where I am. So with Denise, when I'm off, doing something by myself, I'll often just text her and say, hey, I'm going here. My car's parked here. I'm going to do this. And I'll call you when I get done. And so at least somebody knows if I don't show up, somebody, Denise would say, yeah, he was going to, hike up to whatever. And he didn't come. Okay. So that's a flight. Do these things always work? Aaron Ralston, who, as you know, cut his arm off. I know Aaron, and we talked about this, and he was saying, yeah, he doubts whether when he was, this is a recreation, but he doubts whether when he was down in this hole that his PLB would have notified rescuers, and it probably wouldn't have. There is a site, if you're a total geek, and it's called equip.org. It's a guy named Doug Ritter, and he puts these things into, lead-lined buckets and looks to see how well they transmit. And you can get a lot of geeky stuff off that site. All right. For Marine, I'm not going to spend much time on this because I know, well, let me ask, how many people are into boating, especially? Oh, good. Wow. Cool. Okay. So there's a search and rescue transponder, SART, which gives you this sort of, I don't know if you can see it or if I have a picture of it. I guess I don't think I do. So it's that series of little dots. And that is a SART signature. And that means somebody has activated a search and rescue transponder on board a boat. And many boats carry those. There are crew overboard systems. These are not satellite-based, not satellite. But if somebody falls in, the skipper is typically alerted, and the person that's floating off, the skipper knows where they are, hopefully, and it will alert the skipper that somebody's fallen overboard. So there's a number of these. But the latest, greatest thing now is going to these very miniature AIS, satellite-based combination SART transmitters. So for the ocean, instead of just having a crew overboard system, you actually have a device that will activate a distress signal that will literally go to a satellite and also transmit a SART signature so that hopefully somebody can find you. So this is just in the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, but now they make very small AIS SART systems that you can life jacket, which is pretty cool. There's something called digital selective calling if you do stuff out on the water. And the idea here, not going to bog down on this one, is just that instead of running up to the radio and saying, Mayday, 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 giving the name of your vessel and your lat long, you can push a button and DSC will send an emergency signal with your lat long encoded in it without having to say anything. So in an emergency, you just flip a little panel, push it, and you're good to go. That's what it looks like, right? There. Redmond, thank you. Okay, PLBs. Back in the old days when I started giving this talk, I used to talk about all the devices out there. There's too many now. I'm not going to talk about them all. I'll just tell you some of the pros and cons. The first one was Spot. Spot is not a two-way communicator, the early versions. The writing was on the wall. So their newer versions, yes, they're two-way. But their early one was just simplex. It would just transmit either a 911 call. You had all these things you could do. A 911 call was sort of like activating a PLB. You could say, I need help, and friends that you pre-register come and get you without activating the whole rescue system. So if I don't want the humiliation of having Sarah find me, I could just, let's say I have Dave on my list. I could just say, I need help. And Dave would see my lat long. He'd say, Howard is signaling that he needs help, but he hasn't activated the full court press. And so David and some other friends could come out and just find me over by the lake with my sprained ankle. And we don't have to bother Sarah. They have check-ins, which is good. One time I was with the SAR helicopter pilot. I was the medical director of search and rescue in Telluride for many years. We got lost and we didn't have any devices or anything. And we had to bid. And it was on a mountain bike trip into the middle of nowhere. And I said to Tom, the SAR helicopter pilot, are you scared? And he said, yes. And I said, the same thing I am. He said, I think so. I said, what is it? He said, humiliation. And I said, exactly. So with check-in, you know, we could have checked in with his wife or my girlfriend at the time and said, hey, we're fine. And but they didn't call anybody because they knew we were dorks and figured that we just got lost. And then there's track. So if you're a pilot, you can track your progress. And these things cost more, and we'll talk more about that with inReach. So anyway, in the modern era, there's now, the first was the so-called DeLorme or DeLorme, depending on where you live, inReach. But now, of course, it was purchased by Garmin. So the thing was, this was the first two-way or duplex rescue system where not only could you send a distress signal, but you could talk to your would-be rescuers. They have a new system now. This thing's pretty cool. It's the inReach Messenger Plus. And not only can you do what you can do with an inReach, which is download base maps and such, but you can now send photos, just what you need in the middle of nowhere. You can send pictures of what you're eating. You know, here's the gerbil I cooked tonight while waiting rescue. You can send audio messages and all. But obviously, the importance of a two-way system is that you can let your rescuers know you're injured. They'll get back to you and say, you know, what's going on? You tell them, broken my leg, blah, blah, blah. They'll ask if you're warm, if you're happy, if you're bleeding to death. And ultimately, two-way communication with your would-be rescuers. You know they've been notified. That's a good thing. And ultimately, hopefully, they'll come for you. Another advantage of this whole system is that it allows you to download base maps. So if you have a smartphone, like most of us do, and you're in the middle of nowhere, and this has happened to me, I've gone, oh yeah, I'm gonna look at my maps. And I realized I haven't downloaded the base map for the area. And then you're out of luck. But with DeLorme, with a Garmin inReach, for example, and many others, you can download base maps on the fly via satellite. That's a good thing. So anyway, topographic data, et cetera, et cetera. They still make dedicated GPS units. Garmin makes this. And these things are great because then you don't need your smartphone. You just got a really cool GPS rescue device, base maps with a really nice screen. Most of us don't buy these. They're very expensive. They're bulky. But for one-stop shopping, I mean, these things are great. Just most of us don't spend the money and they're big. Spot now has a two-way system because they didn't want to get left behind. There's a million of these things on the market. One I rather like is Zoleo. The thing I like about Zoleo, for example, and I told you I wasn't going to talk about all the different products, but Zoleo was the first to do this. If you're at Truckee Airport, you've got Wi-Fi. So if you're connected to the Wi-Fi, it knows you're connected to Wi-Fi and it'll use Wi-Fi. If you're out there, it'll use cell. And if there's no cell coverage, it'll go to satellite. So you only get charged for whatever is necessary, as opposed to an inReach, which is just typically, at least the older ones, going to use satellite. They may have changed that recently. This is the one I have. It's called a Bivy Stick. There's the Sat Pack. I'm not going to go into this now because it's getting late, but this requires aiming sort of like an Apple device, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the Motorola is a new one that's very inexpensive. Not sure how well it works yet because it's only been on the market for about a year. And I watch these YouTubes and these people, you see them, and they've got like 4 or 5 of these devices on their pets. I'm not sure what's happening to them that makes them lost. Yeah, they always have these. But the one thing I will say is I don't always carry all of this stuff. And I have a survival kit, but I often don't carry it. But the one thing you should get used to doing is do not put your PLB in your flight bag. Do not put your PLB in your go bag in the baggage compartment of your plane. Get used to putting your PLB in your pocket. So if you wreck and you get ejected, have to get out of your plane and it burns up, you've got your PLB in your pocket. So that's one thing. A lot of the stuff I teach, I don't actually do because that's how teachers are. But this I do. If I'm taking a PLB, it's in my pocket. All right. So people have asked me this about these pet trackers. And should I buy a pet tracker and I can save a lot of money? And there are a bunch of them on the market now. There's the GeoBit and the Whistle and about 10 other brands. And the answer is sort of yes and no. Most of them just use crowdsourced tracking via the cellular network or Bluetooth. And so those aren't going to work for you in the middle of nowhere. But some of the better ones, like these two, Whistle and GeoBit, they are satellite trackers. The problem with pet trackers is that they're expensive. So by the time you get into a pet tracker, they won't connect to your smartphone. They don't really have any added features. And the subscription is still about the same as a Garmin inReach. So if you go, no, my friend did it, and it's only, instead of $30 a month, it's $5 a month. It probably was not a GPS-based system. It was probably a crowdsourced system similar to Apple AirTags. Okay, the part you've been waiting for, Apple 14, 15. I have to update this slide, and 16. So what do? They talk to satellites, and you are able to do 2 things. You can activate a rescue, and you can talk to people. And is that a good thing? And the answer is, yeah, it's a great thing. The next question is it perfect? And the answer is, no, not perfect. So I think you can figure out why it's a great thing. That doesn't require much imagination, but things I don't like. Thing number 1 is it really bothers me that if you've got 1 bar on your cell phone, 1 bar of cell reception, you can't make a phone call because you don't have the bandwidth for a cell connection, but it won't turn on the GPS component. So if you're using your inReach, you can just use the satellites. But if you're using an Apple, you have to be completely away from cell coverage. If you're in this limbo zone, you can't do either. And I hate that. Number 2 is you have to aim the device at the satellite. Some have argued, although I don't think this is a great argument, that if you're injured, how are you going to roll over and use the satellite? I don't know. I feel like if you're that, it's like a friend of mine who was a famous expedition doctor used to say, if you're going to die, you're going to die. So that person is probably not doing so well. But the other thing is the battery life we've already talked about. And I often put my phone on the yoke of an airplane. In fact, I usually leave my phone holder in Roger. And I'm always worried that if I wreck, I'm gonna come forward like this, even with the shoulder harness, and smash my rescue device against the yoke. And now it's like, oh, my cell phone's broken, as is my chest, but that's all I've got. And the ELT didn't work for some reason. It's a whole nother bag of worms. This should be a 3-hour talk. And I know you want to get out of here because this is going, but the thing with ELTs is they don't always activate. And in fact, depending on the statistics that we look at, the activation rate is somewhere between about 40, between about 30 and 50%. So somewhere between about a third or a half is what I'm trying to say. There's no activation. Why is that? The antenna breaks, the plane breaks the ELT, the plane's buried in the dirt upside down, for just a lot of reasons. So it's not a bad idea to carry an ELT. I don't, an iPhone 15 is the final word in that regard. But I think it is a great advent. John, the first time I ever used one, actually in the real world, do you want to describe that, Dave?
But you're talking about the
Yeah.
We had a and it's initiated a search. Did they put us on the ground? Did they?
Yeah, I think Fernando is tuned in. He might come on in a minute if we can get him.
Fernando Molina?
Yes.
Hey, you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Fernando, it's a big group in the room, and John, who you know is here, as am I.
Oh, cool.
Do you want to describe what you guys did when you wrecked, or sort of wrecked? Why don't you describe what?
Sure. All right, let me go to, well, I'm not going to show you the picture, I guess, at the moment, but bottom line is leaving Monument Valley Airport in Utah, UT 25, and we were headed back to Las Vegas. So along basically the northern edge or northern rim of Grand Canyon. Short of that, actually, I think it was, let me see, off the top of my head, 22 miles on a 085 from Page, Arizona. Basically, we were starting to lose oil pressure. We eventually lost it completely, and then flew for about I don't know, 3-4 minutes. And then the engine finally started sputtering, about 1,500 RPM, which was not enough to hold altitude. And the rest would be, obviously, got to find a place to land. There's a whole bunch of lessons there on making an early decision. There was some flatter land behind us, but I won't call that now. The bottom line is we ended up on what I'm now calling Molina Mesa, a small mesa in the middle of tons of rock formations on the northern northwest corner of Arizona, about we'd call it 25 miles south of Lake Powell. Very inhospitable. Can you hear me?
Just one sec. This wasn't like a major picturing. This was just a completely inhospitable topography with sort of a little table of land coming away from a cliff. So you say a mesa, I think people picture a giant sprawling mesa.
No, it was a total of 3,000 foot long, probably about 150, maybe 200 foot wide. So about the size of a runway ish. And it was, like I said, some very sprawling rock formations below us, below this mesa. So definitely not fun places to go if we didn't go. If you want me to share, I mean, I can show you all a picture. But if not, no big deal. Bottom line is, I'll say a couple of lessons on the way down. I wish I would have thought about the call 911, but between the two of us working some CRM that worked in our favor, we had our location already given out to ATC before the landing. They were able to call an airplane from Page that made its way back that happened to be part of the camp. So again, we had just gone through all these survival lessons. And unfortunately, we were pretty located pretty quickly. But as far as this lesson goes, I will show you all my inReach messenger. So you can see kind of the same one that he just showed. I actually haven't fired this up since I think October, and it's got 42% battery. I'm sure obviously it would go down. This also has one of those SOS buttons, like you talked about. What I will change a little bit from what Howard said is it also will go between whatever signal it gets, so Wi-Fi versus cell phone versus satellite. But also a really, really important lesson that we always have to be mindful of, and Howard said it at the beginning, know your gear. If you're not connected to your GPS PLB device, these things don't have very useful screens. That's the screen right there, I guess. There you go. So you can do like 3 to 5 rudimentary messages. In order to use your phone messaging with the device, you have to make sure it's synced before you leave. Because I tried to do it on the side of the Mesa and it was not successful at all. So, but hitting the SOS button, the entire Garmin rescue system called me on the cell phone. I was fortunate that it had signal based off of the messenger, and I had signal on the Mesa, and they called me in 5 minutes and said, "Hey, I saw you had an emergency. Are you guys, what's the nature? What's your status? How healthy are you guys? Healthy? Any injuries? Blah blah blah." All of those survival type things. Which, by the way, I heard you have a survival search and rescue person there. One of the first things they do if you have a search and rescue situation is verify it's not a false alarm, right? So they have to verify that you are actually hurt and you're actually in the situation. It wasn't like an ELT on the ramp. So we went through all that. And then the next thing they did is contact my wife and let her know and give her updates throughout the 3-hour ordeal, which I was very fortunate. I think the signaling devices absolutely helped, along with ATC coordination. And another device, we didn't really talk about it a lot, but don't forget about that old handheld radio, because I think they all contributed to not spending a night out, but basically spending 3 hours on a Mesa and then getting a helicopter ride to Page. I'll leave it at that and see if you guys have any questions.
Would you just mention the signal mirror and what your spotter said about the mirror?
Yep. And actually, Jason Miller himself, we're sad that we never got video of it, but yeah, the flash of light. I feel bad that I didn't have one on me, but because my client, the person I was flying with was there on the camp, he got one as part of the survival gear that he got as part of the camp. And so, yeah, I think it was Eric Hope who was with Jason, and they were flying around. And in fact, we tried to use the GPS pin function from the phone, and whatever it was doing in maybe trying to locate towers versus satellites or whatever it was doing, it turned out he was probably about 3 miles south of us when he called. And then I finally pulled the radio up to a common frequency with them. I was like, "I hear you guys, but you're definitely south of us." And then they said, "Okay, we're going to start looking north." And then we flashed them with a mirror. And from at least 5 miles away, he said it was just a huge ball of light coming from where the Mesa was in our location. And that was 100% like it dialed them directly to exactly where our location was and made it easy for them to then fly over subsequently and then help locate us when they got to Page and got another rescue helicopter coming our way. So that's kind of how that went. Also, like Howard said, and I went to the Air Force Academy. I taught survival there. I absolutely implore that you practice with a signal mirror. Don't just assume you're going to use it immediately when you get out there. And if you do, it's really, really simple to use. Just hard to figure out when you're in a stressful situation. And I'll leave it at that again.
Fernando, thanks for tuning in, and it's great to see you. We'll see you soon on some misadventure.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Fernando. Fernando is an ex-F-15 weapons officer. He's like Goose. Not exactly like Goose. Okay. Because I can feel the energy in the room. It's been a long time. So there's a place called Outdoor Gear Lab, which does reviews of all these things. So rather than going through all of these devices, there's a million things on the internet. But Outdoor Gear Lab really will compare these devices if you're interested in what the subscription costs are and, this and that and the features. And it's a really great website for doing comparisons. These companies use their own proprietary rescue coordination centers. Is that bad? It's not the government. These places, mostly the IERCC, do a fine job. There's been no issues with the IERCC. One thing I thought I would plug, I have nothing to do with it, but there's this new insurance company called Overwatch Rescue, and it's $80 a year right now. I feel like it's like the pizzas at Raley's. They were $9, and everybody got hooked on them, and now they're like 90. But unlike the Garmin insurance and many other companies like Diver Alert Network and American Alpine Institute, they don't care where you are. And you can be doing high-risk sports. You can be flying crazy planes or climbing big mountains. And for $90 a year, they'll come haul you out of there. So just look at that company. And I feel like, I don't know what's going to happen. They'll go out of business or they'll change their prices. Okay, we're not going to talk about avalanche transceivers. Everybody that lives in Tahoe that spends time in the backcountry understands you need your Avi kit. They make all sorts of fancy new beacons these days. This one is has a voice function for novices, tells you where the victim is. It's pretty cool. And there's something that skiers have called Reco reflectors. We're not going to talk a lot about, but the idea is it's basically a radar-like device that they can hang under a helicopter, or patrollers can run around with these things and try to locate you. The biggest problem with Reco is that most professionals will tell you that they're typically used for body recoveries, not for live rescues. The best way to rescue a person buried in an avalanche is, of course, an immediate search by the friends of the person that's gone. Reco's built into a lot of ski wear. It'll say in the tags whether it is or not. Things that look like this. They make dedicated Reco reflectors now that you can buy and hang on your pack. So if you think you're going to get buried in a place where they have Reco radar, you might consider having one of these. But this is just a chart that shows that the longer you wait, the more dead you tend to be. So I'm not going to talk about this. People still use sat phones. The advantage of a sat phone in the modern era over something like Starlink is that sat phones are small. And Starlink, even though they're getting smaller and smaller, is still pretty big. But for big expeditions now in the modern era, and I don't know what Sarah's using, but maybe for an incident command in a remote area, using Starlink Mini like this, it's crazy how small they are, might be a reasonable choice for setting up communications during a rescue. I think what I'll do is, I could go on for 3 more hours, but I'm not going to. So let's stop it there and open it up to questions.
First, a round of applause for Howard. Zoom stuff. We'll get some Zoom questions as well.
On the laser, they had a sealed battery. The double A in it, or is it physical battery and lifetime battery?
Yeah, you have to put batteries in, so you have to check it. So I'm not very good about that, but I try to check mine once a year. And I have noticed, I brought one. Do you want to see it? Say something interesting.
Hi, thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you got pizza. If you're on Zoom, yeah, for Howard.
You mentioned instead of like agility, and then it's going to say that it's not just the
Oh,
you don't have self-credit.
it does. Wow.
For those on Zoom, if you didn't hear it, someone in the back has a non-iPhone that sends
It's
it
14,
to us.
15, 60.
Just check your product.
And if you're on Zoom and you got a question, raise your hand and get you.
Real quick, this is very anticlimactic, underwhelming. That is a rescue laser that fans out. So by the time you get to a mile away or so, that thing's hundreds of feet long. It's got a little sight on it. You just waggle it where you see the plane. It's not going to blind the pilot because it's attenuated by that fan, and they'll just see a pop of miles out, bright lights. During the day, 3, 4, 5 miles. At night, 20 minutes. No. Yes.
Three words.
Yeah, so what three words is, maybe you can start too, but it's I tried to use it with a bunch of people sailing
Inside sense, if you know what three words are. With the research, you guys be aware of it.
They're not. I mean, we should ask Sarah, but to my knowledge, they're not. Every time I try to introduce it to the group, I try to use it sailing in Turkey, I think. And I told everybody, let's just use what three words so we can just figure out where you are. And you put in, you put your geographical location in. It returns with three words, and it was duck, rock, tree. And you just send that to.
Remember, we're 10 years and 2 million. It's a 3 meter square. The earth is broken down into 3 meter squares with the surface of the earth. And so everyone has unique 3 words. And so it's like the code. So you can say that's right. I not just about just for hiking. And if you say, if you get this people out, you say what the words are, you know where you are, say the things, and then they can get you within 3 meters.
So it's a great system. I played with it. It works, but it's dependent on obviously the receivers understanding the system. So I think it's something. It's an interesting technology. We're very not British. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Hey, Chris McConnell, are you there? Chris is a tech weenie who's involved in that search. And interestingly, our yeah, it gets better. I know that the rescuers came within literally meters where that aircraft was without seeing it. And I think as in, I can't speak to it, and I hate it when speakers are asked questions and they double the pot. I'll just say there was an interesting editorial done by that from the website for and he talks about just how ineffective ELTs can be. He talks about a lot of the data that was collected by Henry Riddle that looked at just how fraud with malfunction ELTs. So the bottom line is, I don't agree with him that they're almost worthless, which is basically his conclusion. I think they work in at least a third of the cases, which is good. But I think it reinforces that based on experiences like with that Trinidad, that having a secondary unit of some sort will be trouble. Oh, that yields you one.
What's their really good source to relay information?
The people that are doing the rescue is right Patterson Air Force Base, the Airless Coordination Center, AR-16, which is pretty careful. And so ATC, when you go missing, ATC notifies the ARCC at White Patterson. Everyone said, coordinating the channel aviation. But ATC is obviously the direct vendor. So it doesn't hurt them, but ultimately they're not the ones working with Sarah. Sarah's going to be working with the rest of the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, work with Navy and with Sheriff. Actually, Paul Bergerelli, I know he's a bad man, he's a smart guy, I guess, but this was his science. He walked outside of the canyon, got on his handheld radio, and said, "Does anyone come? Does anyone come? 121.5." He goes, "See, it doesn't look like it should be." I was a Grand Canyon guy, river guy for many years. And back in the old days, we used to, we didn't have satellite communication. So we all had airband radios. And when people got wrecked on the river, we would wait for an airliner to fly up there. And we would talk to airliners on which one they would fly. And it worked great. Because they were all monitoring. Any other questions? If there aren't more questions, there's probably more cookies and pizza. And thanks for coming. Don't ever email me if you get my email from the airport or something. I will ignore you. I travel so much, my email's so crazy. Just text me or call me. I'm happy to get you. And David, you can give anybody my phone number that wants it anytime.
And your home address.